Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening up a file that, honestly, I thought I had a handle on.
Oh yeah, which one?
We're talking about Saad ibn Abi Waqqas.
Yeah.
And if you look at the standard history books, the Sunday school version, he's just this giant figure.
Right, the Archer of Islam.
The Archer of Islam, the Conqueror of Persia, one of the 10 men promised paradise. It's a very clean, heroic narrative.
It is.
But then I started going through the stack of research you sent over, and man, clean is the last word I would use.
It's never that simple, is it? With Saad, the surface-level biography is, it's practically a legend.
Totally.
But once you start digging into the primary sources and really looking at the conflicting reports, you realize he is walking right down the fault lines of early Islamic history. He isn't just a hero, he's a massive riddle.
A riddle is right, because depending on which source you read, you get a completely different person. It's like a historical Rorschach test.
That is the perfect way to frame it. And our mission for this deep dive is to try and solve that riddle by looking at what I call the three faces of Saad.
Wow.
You have the Sunni hero, the pious conqueror who stayed out of the messy civil wars to, save his soul. Then you have the Shia cautionary tale, the man who knew the truth but abandoned it when it mattered most. And finally, you have the imperial aristocrat, the view from critical secular historians who see him not as a saint, but as a general building a dynasty and amassing a fortune.
And hanging over all of this is a really dark cloud. I think this was the part that shocked me the most in the reading. You have Saad, the hero of Islam, and then you have his son, Umar ibn Saad.
Yeah.
And his son isn't just a footnote. He is the commander who killed the prophet's grandson, Hussein, at Karbala.
That is the central tension right there. How do you go from being the prophet's uncle and a promised saint to being the father of the man who massacred the prophet's family?
Is there a link?
Well, that's the question. Does the father's famous neutrality somehow lead to the son's atrocity?
That's the neutrality paradox we need to unpack. But before we get to the tragedy, we have to establish the hero. We need to understand who this guy was before all the controversy started. So give us the origin story.
Okay, so we're starting in Mecca, around 595 CE. Saad is born into the Banu Zura clan, and this is a crucial detail right off the bat.
Why is that?
Because Banu Zura is the clan of Amina, the Prophet Muhammad's mother.
So, strictly speaking, they are cousins, but in the tribal structure, he's considered a maternal uncle.
Exactly. And in the Arab tribal system, that is a heavy bond. It gave Saad immediate prestige and a kind of closeness to the Prophet that very few others had.
And he joins the movement early.
Incredibly young, about 17 years old. He's one of the very first. And because he's so young and from such a prominent family, his conversion just triggers this massive domestic crisis.
This is the hunger strike story, right? This honestly reads like a psychological thriller.
It's incredibly intense. His mother, Hamina, was a formidable woman. She wasn't the type to just sit back and complain. When she found out he'd abandoned the ancestral idols for this new monotheism, she went nuclear. She vowed she would not eat or drink until he recanted.
Wow.
She dragged him out into the heat, starving herself, basically saying, "You are going to watch your mother die, and everyone in Mecca is going to call you a matricide."
That is extreme emotional manipulation. For a 17-year-old in a culture that reveres mothers, that's impossible pressure.
Most people would fold just to get her a sip of water.
Absolutely.
They would. But this is where we get the first glimpse of Saad's iron will. He goes to her, weak as she is, and delivers this famous line. He says, "Mother, if you had 100 souls and they departed one by one, I would not abandon this religion."
One by one. That is cold. But it's also incredibly principled.
It establishes his credentials forever. This incident is actually linked to the revelation of verses in the Quran, specifically in Surah Luqman. That's the rule. You respect your parents, you care for them, but if they try to force you to disbelieve, you disobey them. He literally set the precedent for faith over blood.
Which is ironic, considering how much blood plays into his later years. But speaking of blood, there's another early incident that stuck out to me. The camel bone incident?
Yes.
It sounds like a weapon from a game of Clue, but it's actually pretty violent.
It is, and it's historically significant because it's often cited as the first bloodshed in Islam.
So what happened exactly? Because we usually think of the Mecca period as, peaceful persecution.
Usually, yes. But Saad was different. It was early days, and a group of Muslims were hiding, praying in a secluded valley.
Right.
Some polytheists found them and started mocking them, ridiculing their prayer movements, calling them names. It got heated, and Saad didn't just take it.
Yeah.
He grabbed the jawbone of a dried-up camel carcass that was lying on the ground and smashed one of the hecklers over the head, split his scalp open.
Okay, so we aren't talking about a passive monk here. This is a guy with a temper.
A temper or a fierce protectiveness. The Sunni view is this is the lion defending the faith. He's the archer who is willing to fight.
But the critical view,
But if you look at it through that secular or critical lens, you see the seeds of aggression. It challenges the whole idea that the Meccan period was entirely passive. Saad was ready to throw hands or bones from day one.
so we have the zealot, the tough guy. Let's fast forward to the moment that puts him in the history books forever.
Al-Qadisiyyah.
The conqueror of Persia, the Battle of Qadisiyyah, 636 CE. This is the big one.
This is the absolute peak of his career. I mean, we're talking about the defeat of the Sassanid Empire, a superpower that had lasted for centuries.
And Saad is the commander-in-chief.
He is. The victory here essentially opens up all of Iraq and Iran to Islamic rule. It's why you see so many streets and schools named Saad in the Middle East today.
And here's where the narrative starts to fracture. He wasn't actually fighting in the battle, was he?
No, he wasn't, and this is a huge point of contention. Saad was suffering from a severe illness. Sources describe it as sciatica and boils covering his body.
So painful he couldn't even sit on a horse.
Couldn't sit on a horse. He had to lie on his stomach on a mattress in a castle overlooking the battlefield, sending down notes to his commanders.
I can see how that looks two ways. The sympathetic view is, look at this strategic mastermind, overcoming agony to lead his troops.
Exactly. That's the Sunni view. A divine victory guided by a brilliant mind, regardless of his physical state.
And the other view.
But the critical historians, and probably the soldiers on the ground at the time saw it differently. They are down there facing war elephants.
Literally war elephant.
Literally. And their commander is safe in a castle. It feels a bit like the modern general in the bunker critique.
It does.
And secular historians argue that the victory wasn't really due to Saad. They point to subordinate commanders like the legendary warrior Al-Qaqa and the fact that the Persian Empire was already exhausted from decades of war with the Byzantines.
So they say his role was inflated later on.
Inflated by historians to ensure that a Qurayshi elite, a relative of the Prophet, got the credit, rather than the rough Bedouin tribesmen who actually did the dying.
That makes a lot of sense as a piece of historical PR.
Yeah.
You want the hero to be the prophet's uncle, not some random warrior from the desert.
Right.
But regardless of who swung the sword, Saad got the credit. And more importantly, he got the spoils.
The money. This is where the character arc really shifts.
We have this image of the early companions, the sahaba, as ascetics. Sleeping on reed mats, eating dates and water, zood. But the sources you sent say Saad died, leaving about 250,000 dirhams and a massive estate.
The palace in Al-Aqiq. It's a huge problem for that narrative of asceticism. You have to reconcile the first blood zealot with the man who is now, in modern terms, a multimillionaire.
He built a literal castle.
A castle for himself in the quiet outskirts of Medina.
So how did the apologists defend that? Is it just God blessed him?
The standard Sunni defense is that zood asceticism is a state of the heart, not the bank account.
Okay.
They argue that as long as the wealth was lawful, which it was ghanima or war booty, and as long as he gave charity, which he did, then it's not a sin. He earned it through jihad.
But the critics aren't buying the pious billionaire angle.
Not at all. Shia critics and secular historians see this as the turning point. They argue this is where the revolutionary phase of Islam dies. The early believers, who were once the impressed underdogs, have now become the imperial aristocracy.
They're the new 1%.
They are the new 1%, they are the new landlords, and that wealth, that status, that is what gave Saad something to lose.
And that leads us perfectly to the core of the episode, the neutrality paradox. We are moving into the first fitna, the civil war.
Ali versus Muawiyah.
The community is tearing itself apart, everyone has to pick a side, and Saad goes home.
He literally goes home, to his castle in Al-Aqiq. When people come to him begging him to use his influence to pick a side, he famously refuses.
And he says that line about the sword.
He demands a sword that has eyes and a tongue. He says, "Give me a sword that can distinguish a believer from an unbeliever, and I will fight."
So basically, both sides look like Muslims to me. I'm not killing a brother.
Unless you can give me a weapon that tells me who is right and who is wrong, I'm sitting this out.
On the surface, that sounds deeply pious. I refuse to shed Muslim blood. It's the ultimate pacifist stance.
That is the standard Sunni interpretation. It's called war extreme caution in religious matters. He is following the prophetic instruction to sit during times of confusion.
To break your sword.
Exactly, to break your sword rather than use it on a fellow believer. To Sunnis, this is heroism. He saved his soul from the fire of civil war.
But the Shia sources, they don't see this as piety. They see it as a cop-out.
They call it betrayal. And to understand why, you have to look at what we call the third way contradiction. It revolves around a specific hadith that Saad himself narrated.
The Hadith al-Manzila.
Yes, Saad is one of the key narrators of the moment when the prophet said to Ali, "You are to me as Aaron was to Moses, except there's no prophet after me."
Okay, so let's break that down. Aaron was Moses' brother, his deputy, his designated successor in charge when Moses was away.
Precisely. So the Shia argument is, Saad, you know this. You heard it with your own ears. You know Ali holds the spiritual station of Moses' brother.
Did Aaron abandon Moses?
No. So if you acknowledge Ali's rank, how can you claim confusion? How can you say you don't know who is right?
But saying that confusion was a front, that he used neutrality to avoid taking a difficult, dangerous stand.
Exactly. They see it as cognitive dissonance at best and hypocrisy at worst. They argue that neutrality in the face of clear injustice isn't neutrality, it's enabling the oppressor.
By not supporting Ali.
By not supporting Ali, who was the rightful caliph, Saad indirectly helped Muawiyah take power. He removed his massive influence from the scale, which allowed the Umayyads to tip it.
And Saad didn't exactly love the Umayyads, did he? There's that fascinating detail about how he spoke to Muawiyah after the war.
Oh, the king insult. This is a classic moment. After Muawiyah wins and becomes the ruler, Saad meets him. Now, everyone is calling Muawiyah Amir al-Mu'minin, commander of the faithful. Saad walks in and says, "Peace be upon you, O king." Assalamu alaikum ayyuha al-Malik.
That sounds polite in English. But in 7th century Arabia, calling a caliph a king is... That's a slur, isn't it?
It's a massive insult. It implies he has no religious authority, that he's just a worldly tyrant like the Persian Shahs or the Roman Caesars. It's a sick burn.
So Sunnis look at that and say, see? He was brave. He spoke truth to power.
Right. But the critics look at it and say, okay, cool, you insulted him to his face, but you let him take the throne. It just highlights the fractured unity of that era. Even the elite knew the caliphate had turned into a worldly monarchy, but they were too tired or too wealthy or too afraid to stop it. Saad's insult was a way to soothe his own conscience, maybe, but it didn't change the political reality.
And that political reality, that monarchy he critiqued, eventually swallows his own family. We have to talk about the dynastic shadow. We can't talk about Saad without talking about his son.
This is the darkest part of the biography. It's what haunts the legacy of Saad more than anything else.
Umar ibn Saad.
The conqueror's son. Saad opens Persia to Islam. His son Umar leads the army that massacres Imam Hussein at Karbala. It is the ultimate tragic irony.
The father was a companion of the prophet. The son killed the prophet's flesh and blood.
Right.
The big question, the one that makes everyone uncomfortable is the father responsible?
Legally, theologically. The Sunni view is a hard no. The Quran says, no bearer of burdens bears another's burden.
So he died before it happened. He's not to blame.
Exactly. Saad died years before Karbala. You cannot blame a pious father for an adult son's sins. I mean, plenty of prophets had wayward sons. Look at Noah.
That's fair as a legal defense.
Yeah.
But the critical view digs a bit deeper into the moral chain, doesn't it?
It does.
It's not about genetic guilt, it's about the environment he raised him in.
That's the critical argument. Look at the world Saad built for Umar. Saad accumulated massive wealth. He modeled political passivity. Don't fight the power, just survive. He integrated his family into the Umayyad state apparatus.
So when the Umayyads came to Umar ibn Saad and said, kill Hussein and we'll give you the governorship of Ray, Umar was just following the family logic.
That's the argument. Umar ibn Saad wanted the governorship of Ray, a rich Persian province. He wanted the status his father had.
So the critics would say.
Critics argue that Saad's neutrality created the political architecture that allowed the Umayyads to thrive. He taught his son that status and survival were more important than fighting for the rightful imam.
That is a heavy legacy. It suggests that Saad's silence during the First Civil War paved the road for his son's violence in the second one.
It's the butterfly effect of political apathy.
This really complicates the Promised Paradise title. And speaking of titles and legacies, we have to look at the sources themselves. Saad isn't just a historical figure, he's a narrator. He narrated 271 hadiths. That's a decent chunk of our history. Can we trust them?
This brings us to the historical lens. We have to ask about the Saidian bias. Why did the Umayyad-era compilers preserve so many of his hadiths?
Let me guess. Because they were safe.
Exactly. If you look at the content of his hadiths, they often emphasize avoiding civil strife, obeying authority to prevent bloodshed, and the virtues of conquest.
Which is perfect propaganda for the Umayyads.
It serves them perfectly. They want a population that doesn't rebel. So promoting Saad the hero, who didn't fight against the government, helps delegitimize the Alid rebellions. It makes sitting down look like the ultimate piety.
So maybe his reputation got inflated because he was useful to the state.
That's what secular academics wonder.
Yeah, that casts a shadow on the reliability of the narrative. And there's that weird contradiction you found in the notes about the 10 Promised Paradise list itself.
This is a favorite of the skeptics. There is a report in Sahih Bukhari, the most authentic Sunni source, where Saad says explicitly that he only knew of one living person guaranteed paradise.
And it wasn't him.
It wasn't him. It was a man named Abdullah ibn Salam.
Wait. But Saad is supposed to be on the 10 Promised list. That's his main claim to fame.
Exactly. If Saad is on the list, why does he say only Abdullah ibn Salam is guaranteed paradise? Why doesn't he mention himself or the other 9?
That implies he didn't know about the list.
Which implies the list might not have existed yet. Skeptics use this to argue that the 10 Promised Paradise concept was a later theological invention, created to protect the reputation of the early elite against Shia criticism.
So the title might be a retrospective award.
It might be. If Saad himself didn't know he was promised paradise, then yeah, that changes things. It's a reminder that history is often written backward.
Wow. Okay, one last element of his reputation we have to touch on. The supernatural element.
All right.
Talked about the camel bone violence, but he was also known as Mustajab al-Dawa.
Someone whose prayers are always answered. This is part of the saintly image.
Yeah, there's a story of him cursing a man who slandered him.
In Kufa, yeah. And the man immediately ends up destitute and senile, wandering the streets. It's cited as proof of his holiness.
But if you think about it critically, if his prayers were that powerful, why use them on a petty slanderer?
That is the critical question. If you have a direct line to divine intervention, a nuclear option of prayer, why not pray to end the civil war? Why not pray for unity between Ali and Muawiyah?
Why use a divine weapon on a heckler?
Right. It makes the saint look a bit petty. Critics see these stories as hagiography myth-making designed to make him look scary and authoritative, to stop people from questioning his legacy.
Like a warning. Don't criticize Saad or he'll curse you.
Exactly.
It really is complicated. We started this deep dive thinking about a simple hero, the archer of Islam, but what we found is messy.
It is messy. Saad ibn Abi Waqqas is essentially a mirror. If you're Sunni, you see a pious saint who refused to shed Muslim blood. If you're Shia, you see a man who abandoned the truth for comfort and paved the way for tyranny. And if you're a secular historian, you just see a successful imperialist navigating a turbulent political transition.
And it all comes back to that first incident for me, the camel bone.
The irony is palpable, isn't it?
Yeah.
The man famous for shedding the first blood for Islam against polytheists refused to shed a drop of blood for the Prophet's cousin.
He started as the ultimate fighter and ended as the ultimate bystander.
Yeah.
So here is the thought I want to leave you with today. We often think of neutrality as the safe moral ground. Staying out of the fight, I'm not getting involved. But in the face of clear injustice or when the community is fracturing, is neutrality actually a form of piety? Or is it, as the critics of Saad suggest, just a sophisticated form of complicity? When you have the power to tip the scales, is stepping back a moral act? Or is it a moral failure that future generations will pay for?
It's a question that doesn't just apply to 7th century Arabia. It applies to every one of us, every time we choose to stay silent.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.